We talk today about animism, animistic beliefs and animistic schemata existing in the mind of the child and pre-modern adults. Animism means the assignment of mental power, mind, reasoning, even personality and psyche to what we see today as dead matter, such as clouds, winds, waters, mountains, rocks, stars, rivers, and even artifacts. The child, the early child, aged 3, 4, 5, 6, and the pre-modern archaic adult assume that these forms of dead matter are equipped with life, consciousness, mind, reason, and personality. That means that children and pre-modern archaic adults do not make the discrimination between psyche and physis, biology and physics, psychology and physics, subjective and objective, mental and real world, ideas and material phenomena, inanimate and animate forms. That means they presume that every kind of that what we see today as dead matter is in reality full of life, reason, and mind. They do not accept and understand the idea that there are simply mechanical movements and that there exist simply dead matter. Instead, they believe that even every stone is full of life and has a mental power. And they assume the same with regard to waters, seeing them as living beings, full of life and equipped with personality and mind. And the same they assign to woods, trees, rocks, mountains. Every mountain is to them a person, able to think, to decide, to understand, and to act. All these entities have magical powers. And children, when aged 6, 7, 8, lose their animistic views steadily and continually. And when they are 11, 12 years old, children in our society have lost their animistic views and have replaced them by empirical causality and the mechanical world understanding. Children aged 11, 12, 13 years in our society replace the animistic worldview by empirical causality and mechanical world view by the modern forms of rationality. And that means that the stage of formal operations, the adolescent stage of formal operations, is a cause to the decline and to the death of the animistic view and of the animistic schemata. That means the formal operational stage makes possible the discriminations between psyche and physis, animate and inanimate matters, physics and biology, physics and psychology, matter and soul. These discriminations are truly understood only on the adolescent stage of formal operations, only on developmental ages beyond the 10th year of life in our society. That means that child or developmental psychology is a discipline, the approach, the theory that can explain both the existence of animism and its disappearance. And there is no other approach in social sciences and humanities, in psychology, that has this capability and has this capacity to explain both existence and disappearance of animism. Only stage theory has the right and the possibility to do this. And that means that we know the conditions under which animism disappears. Animism does not disappear due to rationality, due to the rise of sciences, due to changes in worldview or values, due to a different way of seeing things. No. Animism disappears only then when the adolescent stage of formal operations is established and the first movements into the direction of disappearance of animism takes place with the advent of the concrete operations. But as long as the pre-operational stage dominates and rules the psychology, as long animism is strong. Animism is dead, replaced by empirical causality and rational worldview, mechanical worldview, when the adolescent stage of formal operations arises and unfolds. And therefore it is absolutely clear that pre-modern humans, because of the adherence to animistic schemata and to the animistic worldview, must stay on anthropological stages below the 10th year. And they cannot stay on the stage of formal operations and having animistic views at the same time. So pre-modern peoples cannot stay on the adolescent stage of formal operations as long as they held animistic views. And as they held animistic views, as every ethnological report documents, as it is absolutely clear that they do not stay on the anthropological stage of formal operations. We don't need to know more than the animistic view of pre-modern peoples to know with absolute certainty that these peoples did not stay on the stage of formal operations and did not develop beyond the 10th year of life. Piaget found several stages in the child, stages of animistic thought. On the first stage of animism, children assigned life and psyche, mind and reason to every object. They do not know any form of that matter at all on the first stage. They do not know any form of physis at all on the first stage. Even stones are full of life in their view. On the first stage, every water, every wind, and every cloud is full of life and consciousness. And even artifacts are full of life and consciousness in the view of the child aged 3 or 4 years. And that first stage is a ruling stage among pre-modern peoples around the world, from the Stone Ages up to the advent of modern society. We see this in the worldview of ancient peoples in ethnographic descriptions from every pre-modern archaic culture. For example, pre-modern peoples even believe that rocks and mountains are full of life and consciousness. They believe that artifacts are full of life and consciousness. For example, they believe that fishernet are thinking and reasoning entities. When fishermen go on hunting fish, the fishernet are believed to be able to find the fish under the water surface, and that they go into the direction where the fish are hiding, and they actively catch the fish to assist the fishermen. Decades ago, fishermen in Mozambique pricked out eyes of children, fixed them at the fishernet in order to help the nets to find the fish underwater. And it was believed in ancient times that artifacts like a table have a soul inside, and that the table can stay only under the condition that there is a soul inside the table, and that it is the soul that holds the table standing. And when the soul leaves the table will collapse, will crumble. And they believe that only then, when the table crumbles, the soul of the table will leave the table, searching for another abode. Or I've heard a story about an African man visiting the Humboldt Forum in Berlin and telling that the return of colonial objects to Africa uses a wrong spelling when speaking about objects. Drumets are not objects, they are persons that must be given back to Africa because they are persons. And he interpreted even the noise drumets make, that these are voices, that they are speaking. And in African universities, you can study drumology to understand the philosophy of drumets. And it is a widespread belief in Africa that man must use the drumets most often as possible, because otherwise the drumets would be jealous, believing men would care more for their women than for their drumets. And we see that This belief into the mental life of objects has penetrated throughout the whole pre-modern world, especially among nature peoples, but not only there, because even in medieval Europe, it was custom to punish objects for their alleged misdeeds, for their crimes, bells that did not run, trees that killed people, or houses that allowed a robbery without preventing it. They all were punished by judges and juries, and were punished by destruction or by exile also. And even Platon in his Nomoi demanded the punishment of killing trees and objects, and their ban to stay any longer in the country. And we see the belief into the mental power of inanimate objects in the so-called nature cults, because it was usual in pre-modern societies not only to personify objects, but also to deify them. Stones, rocks, stars, waters, woods, trees were seen as gods, as divinities, and they received prayers and sacrifices. And it was believed that if they did not receive enough prayers and sacrifices, that they would become angry and would punish humans. It was believed that these inanimate and dead objects fully participate in human society, and that they know everything what happens in human societies, that they understand the human language, that they understand human ideas, and that they punish humans for their delicts, and that they help them in their daily lives with magical support, because it was believed that these entities, these kinds of dead matter, in our view, dead matter, that these kinds of dead matter have magical power to help humans in their daily lives. So it was absolutely common among pre-modern societies that people address the moon, asking him for assistance, or that it was common to pray to a mountain that he helps in agriculture or in childbirth or in warfare, and that the mountain has the power to do this. And therefore, people addressed mountains, asking for help and assistance, giving food and prayers to them, and really believing that it was in the magical power of the mountain to help. And so it was usual to address rivers and to ask rivers for help. The same with trees, stars, waters, and so on. And winds and storms were seen as angry persons. And humans who by themselves got angry with storms started wars against the storms, sticking their knives into layers of air to kill the storm. And you see the personification and deification of that matter in the judicial ordeals. It was believed that when fire decides upon the guilt or innocence of a person, that the fire would decide according to the effects it makes on the skin of the person accused. If the fire decides that the person was guilty, it burned the person. And then the jury or the judge could see the decision of the fire and could carry out consequences. If the fire decides the person is not guilty, it did not burn the person. If the poison does not kill the person in the poison ordeal, then the poison wanted to tell that the person is innocent. But if the poison kills the person, then the jury knew that the person was guilty. So the judicial ordeal relies on animism, relies on the idea that fire, poison, hot water, and so on are divinities, knowing everything about the circumstances of the deed. Omniscience and omnipotence was provided as typical traits of these entities such as fire, water, poison, and so on. Nature cults are, next to the ancestor worship, the main part of ancient religion. And nature cults rely on animism. And that means that nature cults originate in childlike anthropological stages, that nature cults originate in the pre-operational stage. The pre-operational stage is the sole cause to the existence of nature cults. And that means that the mental life of the child aged 3 to 6 is a single cause to this main part of ancient religion. And you see it, for example, in the so-called sun cults. The sun was seen as the master of the cosmos, as a personal being, personal deity, and humans had to sacrifice to the sun and had to pray to the sun. The ancient Egyptians did this on a daily basis. They sacrificed animals to the sun god on a daily basis, and they prayed to the sun every day. The Aztecs in Pre-Columbian America led wars against neighboring tribes to get human flesh devoted to the sun. On the top of the temples, the human sacrifices were slaughtered, and their hearts were burned, believing that the smoke would climb to the sun and would replenish its energy. The sun was believed to be nothing else than a mass consisting of human flesh originating in the temple sacrifices of the Aztecs. And that means, as the sun was made by human flesh, as the sun is a person, is a human being. And as the human sacrifices, as the temples turned to divinities, the divinities climbing up to the sun were the origins of the mass of the sun. And therefore, the human rituals cause the existence of the sun. The rites of the Aztecs were the makers of the sun, the makers of the daily appearance of the sun. Otherwise, the sun would decline and would die. So, the personification of sun originates in the belief of the human origin of the sun. Child or developmental psychology is not only the scientific approach to explain the existence and the decline of animism. Child or developmental psychology can explain under which conditions animism is replaced by empirical causality and by the mechanical worldview. The decline of animism took place in the 17th century in Europe with the advent of the new physical sciences and the new philosophy. In philosophy, it was René Descartes with his famous discrimination between res cogitans and res extensa, who in the first time in philosophy discriminated dead matter from animate things. He was the first to discriminate psyche and physis, life and matter, soul and matter. He was the first to understand that there are things, that things really exist. Aristotle and Plato did not know things, because what to us are things were to them entities with some forms of life inside. So René Descartes was the first to establish the adolescent stage of formal operations concerning the understanding of reality. He was the first to establish the adolescent stage of formal operations in modern philosophy. And he went through this stage the same way as modern people in modern society go through when they establish the adolescent stage of formal operations too, when they gain anthropological stages beyond the 10th year of life, when they go through the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th year of life. We can say that Descartes established the 12th, the 13th, the 14th year of life as modern adolescents do on a regular basis. And they don't do this because they have read René Descartes, but they make the discrimination by themselves between res cogitans and res extensa without having read Descartes, because they established the adolescent stage of formal operations what René Descartes had done some 100 years ago. But of course, it was not the philosophy that made this discrimination for the first time. It was the physical sciences. The new makers of the physical sciences were those who replaced the animistic theory of movement by impetus theory and by Aristotle's theory of movement, by the mechanical theory of movement. And this movement led to the establishment of Newton's Principia in 1687, where the theory of the universe is freed from any animistic views. And so the rational worldview, the empirical worldview, the empirical causality, originating in the physical sciences and in the new philosophy of the 17th century, spread throughout the intellectual world of Europe during the 18th century, disseminated throughout the 19th centuries, and then conquered the psychology of whole nations, because the European nations of the 20th century had abolished the animistic view by the empirical causality and by the mechanical worldview on a regular basis. And that is the reason why modern European nations, for centuries, do not believe anymore in the life and consciousness of waters, winds, clouds, stars, mountains, and rocks. And why we do not ask these entities for assistance and help and do not give them food and prayers. So, if we knew nothing from European peoples or from modern peoples generally, then their abolishment of animistic beliefs, this would suffice to have proven beyond the slightest doubt that these people stay on the adolescent stage of formal operations. We don't need to know more than this. And if we knew nothing more from ancient or pre-modern peoples than their animistic views, this would be sufficient to have evidenced beyond the slightest doubt that these people stood on anthropological ages of children beneath the 10th year, and that they did not reach the adolescent stage of formal operations. We don't need to know more. That children and pre-modern people share animistic views was known among the classical authors of child psychology and psychoanalysis. And it was even known by sociologists and some ethnologists. But what they did not understand was that it is a pre-operational stage that explains the animistic views of the ancient people. Even Jean Piaget did not understand this fully. Even Jean Piaget did not understand fully that the pre-operational stage is a single cause to the animistic views of ancient people, and that the formal operational stage is the sole reason to the lack of animism in modern societies, and that the stage theory is a single approach to explain the differences. And even Christopher Holpike, in his Foundations of Primitive Thought of 1979, did not understand this fully. I'm the only one who have defined this exactly and who has grasped that totally. I think In future times, it is possible that social sciences and humanities can understand what I'm telling here. But it is also possible that artificial intelligence will be quicker. When we imagine that artificial intelligence will have the capacity in about 100 years to understand sciences and to engage in scientific activities, it is possible that artificial intelligence will understand my theory quicker than human descendants working in sciences.